be resilient or build resilience in the workplace so that it reduces their risk of burnout. We know that there's going to be stress. It's a normal part of life.
You're tuned in to Leadership Beyond Burnout. This is where we encourage you and your organizations to heal, lead, and succeed. Our mission is to create 100 healthy workplace cultures and to cure 5,500 women of burnout. I'm your host, Dr. Kimberly L. Wilson. Welcome back to my fired up friends. And if you're new here, listen for some of the actionable steps and challenges to integrate into your workplace and your life. Feel free to send questions to us or to our guests during the show, or you can connect with us at www.drkimberlywilson.com. This episode is sponsored by Leadership and Resilience Consultants. Today, I want to introduce our special guests. We have Kai-Nneka Towsend. UK-based Kai-Nneka Towsend has decades of experience in management and leadership roles across the rail, health, and international development sectors. She's a seasoned professional dedicated to collaborating with clients to develop strategies that prioritize resilience without compromising achievements. Her pragmatic approach to leadership emphasizes the importance of resilience and purpose, while ensuring that clients not only achieve their goals, but also sustain their achievement over time. And without further ado, let's introduce Kai-Nneka Towsend. Welcome, Kai-Nneka.
Oh, thank you for having me, Dr. Kim.
I'm so excited to have you here today, and I'd love for our guests to hear how you bring healing to the world as we begin.
Oh, amazing. Well, as you said at the beginning, I am a leadership coach. And for me, I bring healing to the world through my coaching, my one-to-one coaching sessions around resilience and burnout. It brings such joy to me to hear persons talk about the kind of clarity they gain about how they can regain control over their lives when we have done our sessions around resilience and burnout. So for me, that is how I bring healing to this world, one client at a time through coaching.
Wonderful. Now, have you ever experienced burnout, and what did your burnout recovery look like? And do you have certain practices that you engage in?
I love that question. I did experience burnout. In fact, one of the things I talk about is how very often we go through cycles of burnout. But one of those times that I remember over a decade ago experiencing burnout, it really had took such a toll on my physical and mental well-being. That for me was so important to actually have to take some time out of work. So my recovery actually took place over a couple of years, and that was a combination of things. That was me really taking some time out of work to reflect on my purpose, really reconnect with myself. What is it I really wanted to do? And also just taking some very practical steps to spend more time to rest and re-energize myself and reconnect with like my social circle. So for me, it was three things: reconnecting with my purpose, spending time to rest and re-energize, and also just get back into that social support that I really needed, which really helped me on my journey to recovery from burnout.
And I'm so glad you said that because so many people believe that it's a let me do this thing and I will be healed. I'll feel better. Let me go on this vacation. And they don't realize that because this is a slow burning process, that you almost find yourself in the midst of burnout before you even realize you're there, that it actually takes time to heal and recover for that. So I really appreciate you sharing that.
Absolutely. And if I may just add a little bit to that, when you talk about that whole matter of recovery, for me, my journey could have looked like that. But, essentially for each person as they experience burnout, their individual factors might be different. And so therefore their journey, might be a little bit different as well. And I thought just wanted to stick that into, that part of the discussion.
Beautiful. Now, just looking at your scope of expertise, what specific moments or challenges do you believe have shaped your understanding of effective leadership beyond simply just managing burnout? And how have these experiences influenced your approach to guiding teams and organizations?
Well, for me, in terms of effective leadership, I think one of the key things is the whole matter of emotional intelligence. So there is something about really being able to understand that even though you have a team of people doing work, they're really individuals. So being able to recognize that is really important. Just as I referenced earlier about how important it is to know that each individual's journey of burnout and therefore recovery is going to be different. Equally, as a leader, you need to recognize that within your team, there are going to be individuals who will engage, will learn, will work differently. And how do you harness all of that to create harmony, but also an environment where people can be able to speak up and say, hang a second, this isn't quite what isn't quite working for me. And I think for me, it was so important for me to really understand that and also model that myself. So there are two things there: that emotional intelligence about recognizing how individual people are, but also being able to model for myself that kind of behaviors with my own senior leaders and allowing my team to see that it's okay to speak up and it's okay to be able to kind of say when things aren't quite right.
Mm. So you're really speaking to a lot of it as in terms of organizational culture. And so I'm wondering, what role does that culture play in building resilience and sustaining achievements over time? And how do you navigate the cultural nuances, right, so that you can implement effective leadership practices across all the different sectors and geographical locations that you've worked?
I think that's so important, that matter of culture. And, if we go back to what we're talking about here in terms of leadership, it's the leaders that set the tone, the culture of the organization. And so for me, in terms of being able to navigate those different spaces, if we understand what, for those individual companies, what it is that they see as their vision of what that workplace should look like. Yes,
Right.
ultimately you have your goals that you're trying to achieve, whether that be in terms of serving your customers or profitability, but culturally, what's your vision of what that workplace should look like? And then your leaders again need to be able to model that. So very often, if we think about things like, good mental health or well-being for workers within an organization, more and more companies are really catching on to just how important that is: the physical well-being, mental well-being, and overall well-being of the employees. But what the missing element is that while organizations talk about leaders looking after their teams, is that the leaders themselves are not really either being supported in that realm and therefore even modeling that. And they're the ones that set the tone and culture. So for me, in terms of navigating across different sectors, first of all, for me, it's really being clear with the leadership of that company. What for them? What's that vision that they have of what that workplace should be? And then if that's what you want, you have to start with your leaders being able to model that, because ultimately it's the leaders that set the tone of the culture of that workplace.
Right. And I'm curious, when you said that, you stimulated a question about what happens when leaders don't necessarily buy into the organizational vision and they have their own idea of what it should look like. Do you believe that creates any type of havoc, or do you believe they can still be effective in their roles?
That's a very interesting question, because, one of the things that when we talk about resilience, and one of the five pillars of resilience is purpose, being very clear in your purpose. So as an individual leader in an organization, if when you look at what your own values and in person and purpose or intentions are, if they don't align with the organization, you really have to start asking yourself, am I the right person to be here to be leading, right? So, in answer to that question about what does it create if the leader isn't reflecting what that vision and culture that the organization has set, certainly what you have is that it's do as I say, not as I do. And that disconnect reads
Yes.
very loudly and clearly to employees. So, going
Yes.
back to what I said about leaders being able to model what it means to be resilient, very often I've spoken to leaders and, about what are they doing around resilience. And I can see the pride in their eyes as they tell me about how much they're doing, for employees, and, encouraging them not to be working beyond the 5 or weekends. And then when I ask them, what are they doing for themselves to build resilience? Inevitably, there is silence.
Yes, crickets.
Absolute crickets. And it's in that moment they pause and they go, it really starts to connect with them that, oh my gosh, that is so true. And many times that's for two reasons. One, because the companies focus so much on teams and leaders looking after teams, and so there's that missing support for the leaders themselves. They don't see that as important. But secondly, sometimes leaders feel very vulnerable, exposed. They feel that if they put their hand up and say, I'm feeling overwhelmed, I need a little help and support, then that is a sign of weakness. And, it's something that, as I, engage companies and leaders, I really try to talk about in an encouraging terms of looking very clearly at what support we're giving to leaders. Because again, if they're not bought into that, if they're not looking after themselves, how are we expecting them to be able to look after their teams?
Right. Having more of a holistic definition and dynamics in terms of leadership, instead of just leading from the front, but leading as a whole group, and looking
Absolutely.
at all those parts. Um, do you feel that there are any unique challenges or opportunities within all the different sectors that you've worked before, that could enrich leadership and management styles? Like, what have you seen some opportunities possibly they haven't taken advantage of?
If I think back to the three main areas I've worked in: international development, in public health, and and in the real sector. What I do see time and time again is that when it comes on to introducing change and new strategies into companies, into those sectors, very often the companies get focused so much on the process, and people get lost in that in terms of that support. Where I perhaps have seen a little bit more of a focus on people is around health, and that's because by virtue of the area that you're working in, this health, they're forced to have to think about that, right?
Hmm.
Um, but certainly the learning for me is, coming back to this whole thing about being very intentional as organizations about how it is that you are supporting your people. How is it that you are helping them to be resilient or build resilience in the workplace so that it reduces their risk of burnout. We know that there's going to be stress. It's a normal part of life, normal part of a workplace. But if you are in a sustained period of stress,
Right.
unmanaged stress, that's what leads to burnout. So the lesson there from you, the learning, some of it coming from health is really about being very intentional about what we're doing and thinking about in terms of supporting our people, even as we are pushing or introducing change, new strategies and new visions into a company.
That's wonderfully said. And I know that here in the US that I feel as if our leaders are struggling with actually the implementation. I believe a lot of them really love the idea of work-life balance and considering the holistic needs of employees, but there's a great many that struggle with how do we continue to maintain profits. It's like this, like you have to sacrifice one for the other. So I'm curious about what societal attitudes are present in the UK as compared to that, and how do you believe those attitudes influence some of their leadership practices and organizational resilience strategies?
It's interesting that you asked that question because this year Mental Health UK released their first annual burnout report. And
Mm,
one of the things that they noted is that 9 out of 10 persons acknowledged that they had in the past year experienced high levels of stress and burnout. And when you ask the same people, what they think about what their companies are doing, over 50% of them felt that the companies didn't have a plan in place in
wow.
terms of being able to support that. And that's looking at just one survey that has been done. So I think what has been really good is that the dial is shifting in terms of more conversations around mental health. No, certainly neither stress nor burnout are mental health illnesses, but if they are left unmanaged, they can certainly contribute to poor mental health. And that's what's really important to understand here. So more and more in the UK, what's happening is that there's more conversation around mental health. There's more conversation where companies are looking to say, maybe we should get some mental health training in for our leaders to support our staff, mental health champions. The missing link though is really an intentional approach that says, and here's a plan that helps us to really spot very early when there are signs of
Yes.
sustained stress. And so the attitude of leaders that I have observed here is that there is at least a willingness and openness, recognizing the importance of, good mental health, physical and overall well-being of the employee. I still think that leaders are not yet convinced that they must invest in
Mm,
very structured and very intentional strategies that build resilience in their employee and therefore the workplace and reduce the risk of burnout. You think about the cost, not just to the individual. The same Mental Health UK report said that over 20% of 25 workers last year ended up being absent due to mental health strains because of pressure and stress. On an individual level, already that's affecting that person's family life,
right.
their co-workers. Just think about what that means for an economy, that 20% of your workers, end up absent. And so very often I think leaders missed that there is an actual cost to the business: absence due to sickness, turnover rates,
Right.
poor morale and productivity, so that there's I don't believe that they're still yet bought into investing truly in building resilience and really making sure that there's intentional plans and strategies in terms of making sure that you build that resilience and reduce the risk of burnout to the employees.
And what's particularly, I think, interesting and thought-provoking about what you said is that if you were to ask executive management and the board and leadership about whether or not there are plans in place and that they've invested in this, that they would say wholeheartedly, because we have this our policy is
Yeah.
this. And
Yeah.
but a lot of times there's no implementation, or there's not the financial or backing for that support, or there are some unofficial penalties if you actually even access some of the services available. So in effect, it's null and void. Or do you believe it's somewhat different?
You mean on this side of the pond? What I see so far is that certainly there are some steps taken. I think of some companies that talk about leaders having well-being chats. So what you find is that there is there are steps. There are some things that are in place, some initiatives. Um, I don't want to use the word token, but there are things that are done, but not necessarily part of this very structured plan that says, and this is what we will do. This is how we're measuring the impact of that. And
Right.
and when you talk about whether or not there are repercussions, unfortunately, there is still a little bit of that stigma attached to people sticking their hand up and saying my mental health is being impacted because I'm feeling stressed, I'm feeling overwhelmed. So, in terms of the punitive side of things, it might not be directly, it might not be spoken, but sometimes there's that unspoken kind of,
Yes.
again, going back to culture.
Right.
What do they see the leaders doing? If your leader is saying, talk to me about how you feel, talk to me about how you're feeling stressed, or if there are any challenges, if the leader themselves is not even demonstrating that work-life balance, so they're working the longer hours, what that translates to is an employee or a team member going, I have to keep up with my manager, I have to keep up with my leader, because I don't
Yes.
want to be in that position where they either think I'm slacking off or I'm not doing enough, or if, in this time of such stress, of high cost of living and people being afraid of losing things at their homes, nobody wants to be in a position where they feel like I'm at risk of either not being promoted or maintaining my role because I'm not seen as doing enough. So again, going back to that whole sense of the culture, even if it's not directly punitive, sometimes employees might read that actually here I am better off not saying that, because I don't want to be the only one in my
Yes.
team saying that I feel stressed and I feel overwhelmed, and then get sidestepped because I'm thought of as being, too weak, or not being able to manage, the kind of work. So, hopefully I've answered the question.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And it's very difficult for an employee or even a middle level manager to demonstrate that work life balance or resilience if they don't see it demonstrated in their upper leadership and their management. Or, and I
Exactly.
would also say, even if it's not demonstrated, if the pressures that they are placed upon to produce, or whatever metric is used, does not shift to reflect the ability to have resilience and
Absolutely.
work life balance,
Yeah.
you've in effect done nothing.
Absolutely. One measure I saw, a recent study revealed, it said, when you're thinking about rewarding employees for work done. What companies should start to also think about is rewarding employees when they do demonstrate that whole matter of the being able to be more balanced. And it seems like such a silly thing, but if there is a culture of overworking, and the persons who end up overworking are rewarded with, unfortunately, sometimes more work, but sometimes they're the ones that end up getting, promoted or highlighted as, doing very well. And so in effect, what you're doing is rewarding that culture, that way of overworking. So how is it that companies can incentivize workers to actually work in a different way that still means that they're producing? And guess what? If one of the things that I do as part of the work around resilience with individuals and teams is that there's the resilience assessment. And this whole matter of the physical element, things like sleep, we take for granted. The data shows that persons who have stronger levels of resilience, they are 2 times more likely to be at optimal performance.
Right.
And 7 times more likely to not fall into illness and burnout. And that whole matter of, having good sleep or, eating well and so on. If you think about the knock-on level of working longer hours, you have a heavier workload. What do we tend to do? We're working longer to keep up with the work. And
Yes.
then it means that we deprioritize things like, hang a second, either I'm leaving the office later or I'm even at home working later. And the last thing I'm thinking about is trying to have a healthy, balanced meal. I just need something to eat. You tend to go to bed later, wake up early to still start that cycle again. And
Yes.
that lack of sleep, and Dr. Kim, I'm sure you can talk even more than me about this, has such an impact on a person's ability to
Yes.
perform in their day-to-day function. So something even as simple as that is so important. And we don't recognize the knock-on effect of how do we end up in the sustained level of stress and burnout? It's the little things like that. It's the overworking. So going back to that, how can companies start to incentivize employees to actually be looking after their own well-being and create cultures, workplace environments that supports that to happen?
Actually, and that makes me think of, I remember when my children were in elementary school, and there would be attendance awards, but maybe instead of attendance awards, it's this person used all of their PTO, or this person, or maybe because punitively it would be, oh, if you don't use all your leave, you lose it. But maybe it's like, oh, let's celebrate. Here's a little bump in something, or you've earned an extra leave vacation day because you used all your vacation days. Something like you said to incentivize actually taking a break.
Exactly. And again, I just have to get back to that. Do it yourself, leaders. Are you taking your annual leave? Are you building in time in your calendar, not just for back to back meetings, but
Right,
time to reflect, time to rest? Are you doing that?
right.
You know? So again, and if you're not bought into it, if you're not doing that for yourself, how are you then expect to be able to look after others?
Absolutely. So, with that being said, as we come to a close, I'd love for you to share your website as well as what challenge would you issue to either leaders or organizations or different sectors to be able to make the world a better place?
One of the things that I looked at recently in terms of reports around stress and burnout. So on your side of the pond, there was a recent report by Mercer where they say that even though companies recognize the importance of good mental health and overall or well-being for their employees, over 50% of them do not structure or design work in a way that benefits an employee's overall well-being. So
Yeah.
my challenge is, there's a real cost, going back to that 20% in the UK of
Right.
workers that were absent because of, stress and pressure. There's a real cost to stress and burnout.
Yes.
What are you doing intentionally to structure work, to structure your environment in a way that does consider the employee's well being? Because ultimately, not only does the employee have that individual impact of burnout, but ultimately your business, your bottom line does suffer that cost as well. So that's my challenge. What are you doing as a company to intentionally structure work, design work, so that it considers your employees' well-being and ultimately your own profitability as a business?
I love that. You've been such a wonderful guest. And please share your website before we leave.
So my website is KaiNneka Towsend.com. You can find my coaching services for individuals, but also the work I do around building resilience for leaders and teams.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in today for Leadership Beyond Burnout. I'm your host, Dr. Kimberly L. Wilson. You can find us here every Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time and 2 p.m. Pacific. And until next time,